Okay, tonight we're meeting with Staci Boris, and Staci is a curator at the Elmhurst Art Museum. And Staci, I've been out there within the last 3 weeks.
Oh, excellent.
That was a gorgeous show and fabulously installed, and it's clear to me that you're doing a remarkable job there. Where did you grow up?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And did you think you were going to be an artist when you were a tyke?
I did.
And what happened to that vision?
It got quashed pretty early on, I think in high school, when I realized that I was not an artist and that I didn't have any really original ideas of my own.
That's a problem. And where did you go to college, and what did you major in?
I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I majored in art history. And then, shall I go on?
Sure.
Then I went to Boston University and got a master's degree in art history and museum studies.
And what kind of art history did you specialize in then?
I guess I would say early 20th century.
And how has that information served you?
You know, it has served me. I mean, a lot of the, I'm a contemporary art curator now, and most of what I know about contemporary art happened on the job. But I think that a lot of artists working today have been influenced by, obviously artists of the past. So I think that my knowledge of early 20th century and generally of art history has helped me a great deal. In fact, on the exhibition that I am organizing now at the museum is about our collection, and there's 19th and 20th and 21st century objects in the collection. So it, it's actually helping me right at the moment.
That's cool. What happened after you got out of graduate school? How did you get from that to a job?
I got really lucky. I moved back to Milwaukee and lived with my parents. I applied for a number of jobs. I figured Chicago seemed the most logical place because it was the closest bigger city to Milwaukee. And I landed a job at the MCA, a one-year position working with the then curator Beryl Wright as a research assistant. So I at least knew, so I moved to Chicago on a Saturday and I started my work at MCA on a Monday.
And how long were you there?
13 years.
So wait a minute, you took a one-year position and you lasted 13 years.
Like I said, that was good timing on my part.
Yeah, well, so tell me about, all right, so how did it transition? What happened after the 1 year?
Well, what was I doing for, okay, I got hired for a year to work on the exhibition called Art at the Armory, Occupied Territory, which took place at the National. You remember that show?
Oh, totally. It was one of the best shows anywhere ever.
It was so much fun to work on, and it completely, talk about on-the-job training as far as opening my eyes to contemporary art. I actually did have an internship in graduate school at the Boston ICA, and that's really where my interest in contemporary art began. At the ICA, there was a Robert Mapplethorpe exhibition, the famous exhibition that traveled around, and I saw how much impact a contemporary art or an art exhibition at all could have. I also saw how the museum transformed itself from exhibition to exhibition, and I thought that was, one of the most remarkable things I'd ever seen. And so my experience, I think what, other than luck, what got me the job was that I had actually worked on organizing exhibitions at the ICA in Boston. And so then I got the job at the MCA. So it was a year position, but within like in 8 months, the exhibition opened. And so I had 4 months left on my contract. So I got lucky and we started working with Lynn Warren on the Art in Chicago exhibition, which was a 50-year history of art in Chicago, which was a 4-year project. So they had no choice but to, let me continue working there.
That was a totally exciting time to be involved with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, because the Armory show, because the Museum of Contemporary Art, I'm filling in some details for folks here, occupied a small space and had outgrown its facility and received or got what used to be the Armory, and did an amazing exhibition in the Armory, which was, they had a huge horse ring and lots of gigantic spaces and lots of intimate spaces and stalls and stables and all these different kinds of spaces that contemporary art was installed, and some of it on a really huge scale. And then they tore that thing down and built a new museum on the site. And then the first show was this Chicago History Perspective show that Staci talked about having worked on. Oh, look, we have a guest star.
This is Theo. Can you say hi? Can you say hi?
Howdy.
Okay, good night.
That usually gets him to move away.
Sorry.
Right, so you work with Lynn Warren. Lynn's been at the museum longer than any other curator?
Well, I mean, it's got to be 30 years, probably.
It's a while. All right, so you worked on that. That exhibit was fairly.
Let me just, if I could add about the Art at the Armory. I mean, that was the first. That was one of the earlier exhibitions about installation art, and so that was really what introduced me to that form of work, that sort of environmental, site-specific kind of work. And I got to work closely with every single artist, 18 I think different artists who worked on that show, and I had to find. I mean, this is something that they don't teach you, at school, is how to find materials for artists. And I had to find crashed luxury cars for Frances Torres, and of course we had a budget of like nothing, so I had to somehow call every place in the entire Chicagoland area to try to find vehicles for him to use for his installation. I had to find breast milk for Elizabeth Newman. Do you remember that piece about war? So I had to literally go around Chicago collecting women's breast milk and to put in a refrigerator. I had to find bales of hay for the artist Michael Shaughnessy. So in addition to learning about contemporary art, I basically learned how to ask for anything to anyone.
That must have been a blast. So was it after that? Have you worked on any shows that were as fun as that one? I mean, I hate to denigrate everything else, but that was an amazing show. Was that a highlight?
All downhill from there.
I mean, they could have used that space forever and not built a museum, but anyway.
Yeah, it was really an interesting, kind of wacky experience for me, but quite interesting intellectually as well.
It was amazing. All right, so what did you do at the MCA after you moved to the new buildings?
And then, so I actually did live through the move from the small building on Ontario, which was kind of like a little art center, kind of run by the seat of your pants type of place, with leaky ceilings and whatnot, to the large MCA, which ended up working and being, a very different type of organization. And so I was still working on art in Chicago when we moved, because the art in Chicago was the second exhibition in the new building. And so from then on, I just kind of continued working there and doing my own projects, and as I continued there, I got more responsibility, and my position changed, and I just became part of the curatorial staff and organized a number of small exhibitions, one-person exhibitions, small solo exhibitions. I organized Sarah Z's first museum exhibition, and I organized some wall projects, some site-specific wall projects for the giant entry walls. I was the project manager for the 12 by 12 series since the beginning of it until I left. And then I also organized some large-scale international and national touring exhibitions, like the William Kentridge exhibition and the John Curran exhibition. And then I also coordinated exhibitions from outside that came in, like the Harry Callahan exhibition, the Chuck Close exhibition, which was a major highlight, the Mies van der Rohe exhibition, and the Chinese photography exhibition was one of the last ones I worked on.
Were you always an advocate of the exhibitions you worked on? I mean, did you always think that this was a great artist, or did you sometimes think, I don't like this artist, but I'm going to pretend I do?
Most of the exhibitions, I mean, other than the outside exhibitions that came in, I mean, all of the other exhibitions I mentioned were my ideas. So I only would propose artists that I really wanted to work with. The only one among that group that I did not propose, that I ended up curating myself, was the John Curran exhibition.
I mean, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that rings my bells.
And I did it because, I thought it would be an interesting project. I mean, I felt like there's something important about his work, that it causes so many, it challenges people to such a great deal. And I wanted to understand it myself. So I ended up organizing it with another woman, Rochelle Steiner. So we were kind of both partners. So it was nice to have a partner to co-organize it. And I met John, and I was fascinated by him. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for his work and the importance of it. But it was challenging. It was very challenging for me, and I wrote about it pretty intensely as an exercise for myself.
I hear you. I think he's I like how his mind works. I like listening to him and what he has to say. That's interesting. All right. So, did you choose to leave the MCA? Had it been long enough? Did they have a change? What stimulated the transition?
I had been working there for 13 years, and another opportunity presented itself to me. I left shockingly on my own accord to accept another position at Spertus Museum in Chicago, and I became the Senior Curator at Spertus Museum because it was going to be a brand new museum of contemporary art on Michigan Avenue that I could shape with the director myself. It was an incredible opportunity. I felt that I couldn't pass it up, and I don't think I would have done it if they weren't building a new building. And I felt like the museum itself needed to change course, and it wouldn't have been able to change course had it stayed at the same place and they had the same reputation. So it needed to do right. And so we built a new building, a beautiful contemporary glass tower, and we set out to redefine what an ethnic museum could be.
And it seems like a glorious project, and it didn't work.
I think it worked. I think we accomplished our goal. I think, Rhoda, the director, and I have had many conversations about what we did and what we were able to do and how it was received. But, it was the economic crash in 2008, and the building wasn't fully funded at that point. So Spertus Institute had to make a number of different difficult decisions, and they decided that having the museum wasn't their priority.
I find that a shame because there were some, excellent shows there, and I don't know, and excellent people working there too. So, sometimes that happens.
Thank you.
All right. So then
I'm sorry. Hold on. What is? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Sorry about
okay, good. And then you did a short. Was there something between that and Art Chicago?
No. I stayed home with that guy who keeps knocking at the door.
I'm sorry, say what?
I said I stayed home with the guy who keeps knocking at the door.
Got it. And so then you jumped into the commercial art fair world for a short period of time, which is a whole different kind of activity.
It was. That was the most difficult job I've ever had. I did the best that I could do in that environment, and learned, most importantly at the end, that what I am meant to do was work in a museum.
Well, yeah, that, and you're also meant to work with someone that really wanted to advocate for you instead of constrain you.
Right. The bottom line at an art fair is to make money.
Yeah. And it isn't about the art, and it isn't about the artists, and it's about selling real estate to a large extent, and frequently needs to have a longer-term view. I'm going to say these things, I don't know what your opinion is, but a longer-term view than Art Chicago had for a lot of times. And now there's a different art fair in Chicago, Expo Chicago, and I think their heart and their heads are closer to where an art fair should be. All right, so then you move to the Elmhurst Art Museum, which is a glorious suburban Chicago museum in Elmhurst that is predominantly in a Mies van der Rohe building, and an addition, a facility that's been added onto that building that is architecturally very sympathetic and an admirable place to show art. I find, as an aside, I find it really fascinating that the Mies van der Rohe building had been moved from another location to where it is now. To me, it looks like it always belonged there. So, how many curators are there? Are there others?
Just me.
So it's a whole different kind. And how many curators were there when you were at the Museum of Contemporary Art? 6-ish?
Yeah, and when I first started, it was smaller, and it expanded to, around that, 6 to 8. you know, it was a big department.
Contrast these two different kinds of institutions and your role within each.
Well, that was one of the reasons why I left MCA to go to Spertus, because I felt like in a large curatorial department of, you know, 8 people with really phenomenal curators who were senior to me, that, you know, that while I learned a lot from them and I really appreciated their the collegiality, I wanted to, you know, I wanted to do what I wanted to. That's why I went to Spertus, and then, you know, and Spertus had a very specific context to it. So it wasn't just, you know, being a contemporary art curator, it was being, you know, something very specific, you know, in an ethnic museum. And then Elmhurst, yeah, it's a very small staff. I'm the only curator. I'm, in fact, I work 4/5 time there, but I mean, really, I work full time. But the curator previous to me worked 2.5 days a week. And for a good portion of the history, they actually didn't even have a curator. So it's interesting to see how a museum, you know, evolves over time and the trials and tribulations of a smaller place. I feel like I love working at Elmhurst. I feel like it's my playground in a way. I mean, it's such a beautiful museum. The galleries are gorgeous. There's a Mies van der Rohe house. There's so many potential things one can do. You know, that. And it's really all up to me, you know. So it's work. It's a very different kind of responsibility. It's much more fun, but it's of course a lot more pressure. And I think one of the most important relationships a curator can have in an institution is with the director. And I have a wonderful relationship with the director there, and she's very supportive. And we have, you know, very good conversations about the direction that we want to move forward in.
I feel like the Elmhurst Art Museum grew up when it hired you, and that, you know, and that there's no going back. It's become, you know, an adult museum now, as opposed to something that was, you know, had intermittent quality. The quality level has, you know, gone significantly up because you're there.
Thank you.
I get the sense. Well, I don't know. How do exhibits at the MCA did they come about? Would it be as a curator? I mean, would there be discussions? What I'm trying to find out was there a lot of groupthink? Was a bunch of people challenging each other with ideas? Was there a certain pace or frequency that different kinds of exhibits should happen? Or was it all just different individuals shooting from the hip?
You know, the Chief Curator at the MCA has the power. Okay. I mean, they're the ones who determine what proposals from the rest of the curators move forward. Even though I don't work there now, and almost all the curators, except for maybe 2, are different than when I worked there, I'm pretty certain that that's how it still is. So
it isn't necessarily a result of a bunch of people going to lunch and shooting. Wouldn't it be great to do something with Sarah Z, or maybe we should do something with Tara Walker? It's sort of, you know, and maybe we should do Sarah first, and then those kinds of discussions don't quite happen as a group.
You know, so on occasion they'll happen, or they'll happen with a smaller group out of the larger group. Ideally, they would happen in a large way, and it would be a fascinating discussion and challenging and arguing back and forth. I didn't really ever experience that in the 13 years that I was there. I mean, on occasion I would. You know, Sarah Z came about something just happened sort of an odd way. I had proposed William Kentridge to do a project, which was just which would have been a small, like, one-person exhibition in a smaller gallery. And during that time, he was offered an exhibition at MoMA. And, you know, I had already met with him. We'd already established a relationship, and, you know, we've committed to doing a project. But he's like, dude, it's MoMA, you understand, right? And I did understand, but then that actually led to us doing the larger survey, you know, the larger exhibition. But then it left a hole in the exhibition schedule. So I remember Amada Cruz, who was the Chief Curator at the time, coming up to me and saying, well, you have a hole, you have to fill it, you know, and I'm like, okay, sure. So I went back to, you know, anyway, I had to propose a couple artists to fill that spot, and that's when I proposed Sarah Z. So, I mean, that's how that happened. It wasn't like this, you know, ideal sort of situation of everyone talking about who were the most interesting artists at the time. Sometimes you can just kind of walk into someone's office and say, I want to do a Sarah Z exhibition, and they'll say, okay. because they get it, they know, they think it's a great idea. Other times it's a lot more difficult to convince your colleagues or the chief curator to do an exhibition. I actually remember proposing a Marina Abramovich exhibition many, many, many years ago, and I was just, you know, no one even gave it a thought. And, you know, it's kind of funny considering where she's come.
Yeah, it's done well without you having had the show. The Sarah Z show at the MCA was, I don't know. I'm trying to think of seeing a better piece or a better installation. There was something really fresh and different and vibrant about that show. It was really stellar. All right, now, how about, so that is most of the pressure at the Elmhurst Art Museum for exhibits on your shoulders? Are you the one who hatches most of these things? Do some of them happen with discussions with the director? How, what?
Yes, all of the responsibility is on my shoulders. I'd have to have approval from the director, but when I arrived in Elmhurst, there were no exhibitions organized. So, you know, often when you come as a curator to another institution, they have a year or two or more's worth of exhibitions already planned, and you kind of have to work through that. You know, it's the good and the bad. I mean, sometimes you have to organize other people's exhibitions, and which you may or may not like. But then that also gives you time to start developing your own exhibitions. And in the case of Elmhurst, I had to hit the ground running. I started in July, and I had to open an exhibition in September. That was already, you know, that was half curated, but it wasn't finished. I'm sorry, go ahead. So that was tough, and then I didn't have any kind of lead time to continue developing the exhibitions that would come after that. And Elmhurst is a very different context and has a very different audience than the other museums I worked at. So I feel very strongly, and I think a lot about who our audience is at Elmhurst and who we want it to be, or, you know, how we want to change it or expand it. And I think I curate exhibitions toward that end.
I got two questions in different directions. Let's talk about the audience for a moment. What do you do? How do you do it? How do you try to grow an audience? What are you trying to do with exhibit? So that if you could have a William Kentridge exhibit, you might not.
No, I think William Kentridge would be very. I think he's a very accessible artist, and I think he can speak.
So accessible. I agree, he is accessible, as is Sarah Z, for example. But you wouldn't do a John Curran show at Elmhurst.
I might. I don't know. I mean,
so what's the
it depends. It's not. It's I think as a curator, as you know, as a single curator at an institution, you want to plan out your exhibitions like a year at a time. I mean, I remember Elizabeth Smith, who was the former chief curator at MCA, always telling me that she felt like she was an editor, that she would edit the exhibition schedule because at MCA there were a number of different exhibitions at the same time. So it always was important to her what exhibitions were concurrent with another exhibition, what exhibitions followed another exhibition. There had to be a good rhythm to the exhibitions, and they had to make sense, you know, in their sequence, and they had to make sense with each other, in addition to just generally, you know, being important, relevant to the time, and following our mission. So I try to do that as well. I mean, we don't have, you know, as much space as the MCA, so there are not, you know, as many exhibitions going on at the same time. But I mean, I think there are some exhibitions that I wouldn't curate at Elmhurst, but I've always felt like that I curated for, you know, a diverse audience. I mean, I appreciate art that is, you know, visually stimulating, yet it's still challenging and can be entered on many levels, so that, you know, someone who doesn't know anything about art can appreciate it, and someone who knows everything about art can still appreciate it.
Do you as an institution track your demographics and how many kids come in under 10, how many kids under 20, how many adults, how many you know, new members? Do you keep track of that kind of stuff?
I think we do. I don't.
So, all right, so you don't, but so that information isn't necessarily laid on you. Someone doesn't say that show had 30% less traffic than the last show. What do you think? Be careful. Or
I think the thing I know. I mean, every week I get a report that tells us how much revenue we've generated, and how many people have come through the door every day, like on the different days. And then it's coupled with a report from last year. So we can compare how many people this year have come versus last year, and then which exhibitions, you know, it says which exhibitions are there, and then how much revenue we've generated. That's the first time I've ever been privy to that kind of information on a weekly basis.
Does it affect your thinking, or does it just sort of like go into your mindset a little bit?
You know, I try not, I mean, I take it all in, and I try, but I feel like you really can't analyze it. I mean, this is what I worry with everyone else at the institution, especially our director, that you take each week's information to heart, and it's just 1 week. I mean, you really, I feel like you can't assess it on a week basis. I mean, you have to assess it a year basis, or on these much larger long-term basis.
I would agree. I mean, you know, 1 week's weather could have a huge impact on how many feet come in the door.
Mm-hmm. My big question that I have not answered, that I hope to know in the next 2 years is, and maybe, you know, we could talk about this, is whether people come to museums for actual exhibitions, specific exhibitions. Do they come just because they want to go to a museum, or do they know what they're going to see because they've researched what exhibition we have up at the time? I mean, I actually don't go to museums unless I know what exhibition is there, and that's how I choose which museum I want to go to. And there are, of course, exceptions. There are exceptions to the rule. I mean, if I feel like going to the Art Institute, I'll go to the Art Institute, and there's so much to see there, it doesn't really matter if it's an exhibition. But for something like Elmhurst, there's no other, I mean, it's the exhibition or nothing. You know, that's all there, is what the exhibition is. And then there's the McCormick House, so there is a special other feature, but I'm not sure that
What about the demographics of your audience? Aren't most of the people within 50 miles and not, you know, I mean, I'm assuming that most of the people at the Art Institute are further than 100 miles away. Most of the people who attend, most of them are from out of town. I would think that most people who go to Elmhurst are from the community, the expanded community.
A lot, yeah, the majority are, but a good portion are also from Chicago.
Right.
I mean, yes, you don't have
community.
Oh yes, from the region, or from, you know, from Illinois. Yeah, I mean, there's not the other demographic, I would say, but I don't know that we've actually calculated it, is, you know, architecture enthusiasts who will come specifically to see the Muse House, and that's something that, you know, we want to try to, you know, augment.
Do you get proposals for exhibitions?
I get more individual artist submissions than exhibition proposals.
Okay, so how do artists get on your radar? I mean, how do people just cold send you proposals and sometimes something happens, or is that not a worthwhile way of going about it?
I will just go out there and say I don't think it's a worthwhile way of going about it, but there have been exceptions to the rule. There have been packets that I will open for some reason. I don't know what, I always feel like it's sort of fate in a way. Yep. And it'll be something interesting, or I'll recognize the name, like maybe I've seen the name before, but I'm not exactly sure what kind of art this artist makes, and so I'll open it, and it'll be like exactly the work I'm looking for this one group exhibition or something. I mean, that has happened very rarely, and very rarely, I mean, now with, you know, different, I mean, everyone communicates digitally now. You know, I very rarely receive actual packets in the mail anymore. I used to have, you know, packets like, you know, 6 feet high stacked up next to my desk, and it's very hard to find the time, you know, to look through those. Now I get emails from people asking me how to submit. I think in the past, Elmhurst was much more open, or that not open, but that was the method they used to organize their exhibitions. I mean, there are some museums who use that method. They have an open call. They ask for submissions, and that is not how I curate the exhibitions at Elmhurst.
Okay, which begs the question: how do you curate exhibitions at Elmhurst? Yes.
You know, I mean, I've been a curator for 20 years. I've traveled around the world, and I spend my time looking for artists and reading about artists and talking to artists and other art professionals about interesting artists and trends and ideas. And then I have my own ideas of interesting topics that I want to address through you know, artists' work. And so that is really how I find the artists. I have a knowledge of a lot of artists and artists that I've wanted to work with over the years. I mean, even though I've been working for 20 years, there are many artists who I haven't worked with that I've always wanted to work with. And then there are new artists whose work I've introduced to through various ways, whether it's going to a gallery or seeing it online or talking to someone else about it or making a studio visit. I recently was invited to Chicago Artists Coalition, to the Bolt residency, to make a studio visit, a day-long studio visit for all of their artists in residence. And so I was there like all day, and I visited, I don't know, at least 10 or so. I don't remember how many artists, but it was a long day and a lot of artists. And some of the artists were actually quite interesting. And one of them I've already invited to work with me at Elmhurst Art Museum. And she happens to be an artist who I actually did a crit with when she was in graduate school at the University of Chicago. So it was someone I had already known, but I hadn't really been following or known where she had gone, and then we were reintroduced. So I mean, those are interesting ways of learning about other artists as well. Sometimes when I'm organizing a group exhibition and it's around a theme or it's around a certain medium, and I have a number of artists in mind who I know I want to include, I will ask them if they have suggestions or if they know artists that might fit into this context. And that is a very, to me, a very fruitful way to find artists.
Okay. Do you make an effort to have an adequate number of females and minorities represented in the exhibitions?
I do. I don't always achieve it, but I do make an effort to do so.
Do you think most institutions do that now? Or do you think most female curators are more attentive?
I mean, as far as females go, I am extremely aware of that when I organize exhibitions. As far as different, backgrounds, I'm aware of it, but it's not always, I'm not going to do it just to do it, but I endeavor to do it if I can. I think it's the right thing to do. There aren't always artists that I found, it's not like a perfect world. So it doesn't always, I'm not always able to achieve that balance.
I remember when you were at the MCA, you did some side jobs, like curating art for a hotel collection.
I did.
And I thought you did a remarkable job doing that. But is that a conflict? Or I gather it's not technically a conflict. I mean, it's not a secret that you did that, right?
No. I mean, it came to me through one of our trustees. I mean, it was for the Hyatt, and it was the Pritzkers, and it came through the museum. So I felt that if the museum was asking me to do it, and it came through the museum, that that it was sanctioned by the institution.
Sure.
Actually, I found it very educational. I mean, I don't know if I've done anything like that since, but I actually worked with artists that some of whom I didn't work with at MCA and I haven't worked with, but it did introduce me to a number of artists, and it was a very different way of working. I didn't like the fact that they expected me to present them with like 1,000 artists, like here's 100 artists for you to choose from. I mean, as a curator, I am the one I usually make the selections myself. I'm like, these are the 5 artists that you should choose. But it didn't always jive with their tastes or they thought of, I think, that the people who I was proposing it to were actually the designers, not the Pritzkers, and they weren't necessarily thinking about the value or the importance of the artist. They just wanted to look good, really, in the hotel.
Yeah.
So I had to try to achieve the balance of something I felt comfortable with proposing, and that they, that they would accept. And remarkably, they allowed me to work with Mary Broger to, that, is that still there even?
I think it is. It was behind the reception desk.
Right, it was behind the reception desk. She created a new work specifically for the reception desk wall out of plaster and like rusted metal, which changed over time, and it was pretty radical. I was pretty impressed that they let me do that.
I was impressed that you did it. So same kind of thing. But now also, hey, if you guys have some questions, start thinking about them and raising your hands. I'm ready to open it up. You jury shows periodically. You do other tangential kinds of activities besides museum curation, right?
Occasionally I do jurying. I actually just juried something this past week at the Water Street Studios in Batavia, Illinois. I was trying to kind of reach out to my my new colleagues in the western suburbs. Little did I know how far Batavia really was from Elmhurst.
I know, I've been out there. And everything's, it's all an aisle. And not really. But so, I mean, when you do these flanking maneuvers, when you do these extra credit activities, do you find artists that way sometimes? I mean, I did actually find an artist through that experience. Not one of the artists. I mean, it's funny. It's not always the artists who have applied for that show. I mean, through my conversations with the people at Water Street Studios, I mean, they're really interesting people. The director himself is an artist who I hadn't known before and find his work very interesting. They did an exhibition about light, and I'm doing an exhibition about light, and they sent me information. And one of the artists in that exhibition seemed like exactly the kind of person I was looking for a particular piece that I envisioned. So I contacted her, and she's already come to the museum, and we're trying to develop a piece together. And I'm certain that wouldn't have happened had I not juried that show. So sometimes, I mean, so the artists might participate in that show. They might not even be in the show. They might apply for the show. They might get an award. They might not get an award. But something tangential like your interest can come from that.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a linear kind of relationship.
Well, like I said, I mean, this artist who I'm interested in was not a part of the show I juried. I mean, she had just shown at this institution before. Yep. So it was just, I mean, I choose to jury shows at institutions that I think are interesting or with or that are run by people I think are interesting, because I feel like I might, while the artwork that I jury into the shows or don't or see on the jury isn't always very interesting to me, the experience always, is positive in the end for, maybe different reasons.
What are the ways, I'm going to see other people's questions after this one. What are the various ways that artists get on your radar, question mark?
If I've seen them work in a gallery, if I've seen their work, yeah, if I've seen their work in a museum. Okay. If another artist recommends their work to me, or any other art professional, curator, writer, whatever, through these, these tangential ways, whether I'm jurying or if I'm invited to, visit artists at a residency, like at Bolt, if I'm doing critiques, at the schools, and if I see them online. I mean, online is a way that I actually find artists more now than I ever have. How does
that happen? I mean, how do you know who to look for, or is it just on Facebook and somebody posts an interesting image and you look at that, or what?
No, in some ways, like if I'm organizing an exhibition around a theme, then I'll just start, looking for artists who work in that theme, or other exhibitions that have maybe addressed that theme, or and then in another way, I read a lot about art online, and I get a lot of the daily emails and things about art, and if there's some interesting artists on there, or like New Cities, breakout artists or something like that. I mean, they actually have a great track record at picking really good artists, and so not that I wait for that to come out and say, oh, I'm going to do a show of all the New City breakout artists, but I seek out as much information as I can, and I kind of have them once I've read about them, and I find them intriguing. I kind of have it in the back of my mind, but I would never go the next step until I would meet with the artist and make a studio visit.
Sweet. Sabine has a question. Sabine's in Germany and participating live. I don't know when she sleeps.
Wow.
Go ahead, Sabine. Did you fall asleep?
No. I'm wide awake. I would be very interested to know whether, as a curator, you try to develop your own style, so you're recognizable. Is there a kind of profile you develop as a curator? Is that an ambition, or is that something one doesn't think about?
Good question.
That is a great question. I think some curators may think about that. I don't think about that.
So what is that motivates you? What what catches your eye, or what is it that what theme? I mean, that was interesting to me to hear. You know, the themes that you have.
Yeah.
Does that go in one direction? Does that yeah?
Well, the themes are, or the the premises or the concept behind the exhibition can come from a number of places. I mean, at Spertus, it's a Jewish museum, so I mean the themes that I would do there, the things that I would do there would be different than I would do elsewhere. At Elmhurst, the first exhibition I organized was about home, and it was inspired by the McCormick House, the fact that we have a Mies van der Rohe house as part of our institute, as part of our building. And when I was working on the house, which was how I got to Elmhurst, I was a consultant for a couple months just working on the Mies house. I started, thinking about the house not just as a piece of architecture, but as as an actual home where people lived. And I was looking through a lot of the, the images to see how people changed the interior and how they lived, and then I just started thinking about what that meant and what kind of identity a house or home means to someone or can project of someone. So I did an exhibition about home because I had already actually had this in mind a while ago. I mean, there are a lot of artists who are addressing that theme. It seemed like a timely thing with, the foreclosure crisis. It kind of covered a lot of bases, so it was timely, it was in the news. It was something a lot of artists were addressing anyway, probably because of that, or, it's just kind of a potent symbol. In fact, there's a show now at MCA about it that chronicles, a history of artists who are doing that. And it has this relationship to our institution and to the McCormick House, so I was able to tie in that part of the institution with the exhibition program. And that's one of my goals at Elmhurst, and that's something that they have actually never done, is make a relationship, try to have a cohesive, relationship or communication between the different elements of the institution. There's an education center, there's the McCormick House, and there's the galleries, and the three have sort of operated separately. And I felt like when I came in that they should have more of a relationship with each other, and so I would curate shows on occasion toward that end. I also, right now, Mies van der Rohe is so much part of the institution that a lot of the exhibitions, like the one I have now, and a couple that I have coming up, deal with modernism and the legacy of modernism and how contemporary artists are influenced by modernism. And I'm going to invite artists to do projects in the Mies house itself and respond to it, site-specific projects in the house. So those are the kinds of things that are motivating me as far as themes. But I also, in my daily, my going out and seeing artists, just find artists that I think are really working and making really important work, and then I'll want to show them. So sometimes in that way, that artist will serve as the inspiration for a larger group exhibition, and I'll try to find other artists who would complement that artist, and that's actually how the current exhibition I have up now happened. The galleries are divided in such a way that I can have a group exhibition, which is, kind of organized around a theme or an idea or a concept that I can use to talk about the exhibition and to maybe get people excited to come see the exhibition. But on the other hand, I can also, because the galleries are divided into these kind of separate spaces, they can be a group exhibition, but they are also kind of substantial one-person exhibitions within the group, which I really appreciate because I always like to see more than one work by an artist.
Cool. Okay, Sabine. Oh, wait, I have you muted because there's some echo. You all right?
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too. Hold on, I saw more hands here. Where'd they go? The hands came up and the hands went down. What happened? Tyler, did you want to say something? Tyler? Okay, I'm assuming you didn't. How about Ursula? Did you want to ask? What happened? Somebody knocked on everybody's doorbell at once? Suzanne, did you want to ask a question? Where'd they go? Well, all right, I'll wait for them to put their hands back up or something. Do you have a contract there? Are you there for a finite period of time and then hopefully are renewed? How does employment at a museum work?
At will.
At will. So, okay. Interesting. All right, cool. There are other people with hands up, but I don't know if you guys have hands up from before or not. Maria, do you have a question?
Just wanted to ask, you referred to important work, and I mean, I have a sense of when there's a new development in the art world, a different way that people are speaking, maybe it's a different material. Could you explain a little bit what you would define as important, or what the art world or the curatorial world views as important, how that sort of comes to be, I guess?
You know, I think I really appreciate, I mean, one of the reasons I like working with artists and have dedicated my career to working with living artists is I think artists are keen observers of the world, and they have insights into the world and into society, how things operate and how we live, you know, within a greater system. And I have been inspired by many artists who I feel present, you know, kind of digest what's happening around them and spit it out, filter it in a unique way, in a way that I've never seen before. And whether that's just by their forms or by their materials, I'm inspired by artists who transform materials in a way that is surprising and that seems challenging. I think that there are artists who are making interesting socio-political statements that I think, you know, are relevant at different times and about different subjects. You know, so I mean, those are some of the things that I look for. You know, I think it's important that artists be aware of art history and what has come before them, and look to push the boundaries further. Do something, you know, not that everyone has to. I mean, a lot of artists are influenced by other artists, and you know, that's to be expected. But I feel like I want to see something that an artist makes that I've never seen before, that I wouldn't say, oh, that looks just like a so-and-so, or this is something different that I haven't seen. I mean, it may have similarities to someone else, but the way that this is constructed, or the way that it's formed, or the way that it's positioned, you know, the complexities that it has, the different layers that it has, you know, something that you don't tire of looking at after one viewing. I mean, something that you can come back to and see in a different way, and something that might change your perspective and how you look at the world. I like people to have a challenging and stimulating experience when looking at art, whether it's, you know, seeing something that you've never seen, which will expand, you know, what you look at and how you see, or learn something new about a certain topic. I mean, I have no problem with art being educational or didactic to a certain level and to a certain extent, and entertaining. I mean, you know, if no one sees your work and they don't enjoy it, whether it's, you know, I don't mean a frivolous kind of enjoyment, but they don't enjoy experiencing it in some way, you know, they're not going to remember it. And, you know, you can enjoy something, just like a horror movie, you know, you can enjoy something that's scary or disgusting, or, you know, I mean, you can have an experience that is, you know, rewarding, and it doesn't have to just be beautiful, you know.
Thank you.
Helpful?
Thanks. Hold on. Who's got the question here? Chandrika, go ahead.
What lead period do you work with? Like, what year are you planning exhibitions for right now?
My director asked me to make a 5-year plan.
Whoa.
which was a good exercise. You know, I take a long time to curate shows. I mean, this is what I've been learning, and that I've seen how other people can put together shows. You know, like I said, the galleries are divided in ways that you could have 4 one-person shows that have no relationship to each other, and that's not what I want to do. I mean, if I have 4 one-person shows, I want them to relate to each other and have, you know, the reason why they're all there at the same time. So I have shows that are planned for the next couple of years, but I have a lot of holes within those shows. And to be extremely honest, I mean, all of those shows are dependent on raising funds.
Is that a job of yours?
It's not my primary responsibility, but we don't actually have we don't have a dedicated development person, and that is a huge issue for us at the museum. We're going to hire someone. You know, I feel like because no one else is really doing it, that I'm expected to do it. No one has come out and said that to me, but if I want to do the exhibitions that I want to do, I don't see anyone else doing it at this point.
My understanding is that lots of curators have to do lots of fundraising at lots of institutions. Is that your understanding?
You know, it has never been one of my primary responsibilities. I mean, mostly at MCA because I was, you know, there were so many other curators there. You know, you have to participate in writing grants. You have to provide the seed material for the grants, and that's sort of the easy way of fundraising. I mean, it's not easy to get a grant, but you know, you just sit at your desk and you write and hope for the best. But going out in person or calling someone on the phone and seeking corporate or individual sponsorship is really putting yourself out there, and it takes a lot more courage and effort and time, and nurturing those kind of relationships. At a small institution like ours with 6 people, there is never enough minutes in the day, and but I'm a little concerned about being able to do the exhibitions that I want to do based on the amount of revenue that we have.
Okay, cool. I see some hands up, but I'm not clear if they were up from before you guys or not. So, like, Lila, do you have a question? Whoops, hold on. I misclicked. Lila, do you have a question?
Hi,
No?
Stacy. Yes, I do.
Okay, cool.
Stacy, thanks very much for talking to us.
Good session.
Picking up. I'm sorry. Start over.
I said sometimes artists.
Go ahead.
Sometimes artists are asked who or what inspires them or what their role models are. And I wondered whether or not Elmhurst Museum looks to another museum for inspiration or as a role model.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. In fact, I have spent a little bit of time trying to find museums that are like Elmhurst, that we could partner with. I mean, in the long run, because I feel like we are a bit of an anomaly. We're a museum in the suburbs, but we have, but it doesn't, it's not like a community art center. I mean, it's a very professional-looking museum. It's shown, national and international artists. I mean, I have ambitions to show artists like that, but we're small and we have, a smaller budget than the larger institutions. We also have a house attached to us, so we're part of this at-home consortium, which is a kind of Chicagoland consortium of house museums. We're the most contemporary of the houses that are on in this consortium, but so we're working, in that context as a house museum, but we're also an art museum and a contemporary art museum at that. We're also an educational center that has classes and camps, summer camps all around for adults and, well, not summer camp for adults, but classes for adults and children and summer camp for children. So I've just started making a list of museums that I felt like would be similar to us, and one of them that I came up with was the DeCordova Museum outside of Boston. And I lived in Boston, so I actually know that museum, but I hadn't really paid much attention to it before. And I've been looking at their program, and they have a very ambitious, interesting contemporary program. They are different because there's a sculpture park, a sculpture garden, so they have a different focus. But that seemed like an interesting one. But I honestly am not that familiar with many museums of this size and that aren't in the city center. So that's something that I'm, continuing to look at and to research. Are you thinking of any museums in particular?
Your voice is coming across in bits and pieces. Try again, and maybe it'll work.
It made me think of the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, which is suburban Philadelphia. It's got educational component and contemporary art there too.
Okay, thanks.
I was thinking also, Staci, of like schools, and I just went to a couple of days ago. Drove to the new Broad Museum at Michigan State University in East Lansing, and I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to. But is that our various school institutions, no?
I don't think so. I mean, okay. I think maybe from the outside they seem similar in the size, maybe in size and staffing or something like that. But having a built-in academic audience, I think the student body is your main audience when you have a university.
I've asked every time I go. They said we don't cater to the students. Most of the students don't come unless it's a place to get warm or chill as they trek across campus. Art students are compelled or have to come look, but they don't really. I mean, it's sort of like their mission is a bit more confusing to me.
I mean, I'm sure different university museums have different missions, but I mean, I would love, I like the idea of having, a student population because students are there to learn. I mean, they're open to new ideas, and I think that, that would be a really great audience to work with. We have Elmhurst College right behind the museum, so we have, reached out to them. I mean, I've only been at the museum a year, but it seems like we've given Elmhurst College faculty and students free admission. I've had interns from Elmhurst College, and so I would love for them, and their classes come on occasion for tours. So I think, I'm very interested in partnering with the institutions that directly surround me, but also other museums, that might have similar interests.
Makes sense. Cool. I got a couple more questions, and I don't know if anybody else does. I don't see any more hands, but if somebody raises their hand, I'm going to call on you. So if this is a good chance to get it in. When I shifted gears and stopped having my own commercial gallery and curated the collection for McCormick Place West, consciously my notion of the purpose of art changed. Do you feel that has the purpose of art at these three different institutions you've been affiliated with changed in your mind?
No. Not the purpose of art, but it's more the way I shape the exhibitions for each institution and how the programming has to respond to that particular site and that particular site's goals, and mission.
Correct. Okay. And then lastly, do you feel that, my sense is that most of the Elmhurst Art Museum shows are with local artists, or artists within 100 miles or so of the institution. Is that correct?
That is what it has been for the last couple of years.
And is that going to be, you want to alter that or maintain that or stir it up?
I think I'm absolutely, I think it's very important to have, to support local artists, and almost all the artists I've shown since I've been there have been local. But actually, I mean, in the larger group exhibitions, it's been a combination. In the ceramic exhibition that we had when I first started, There were probably half and half. In the open house exhibition that I organized, there were 2 artists that were not from Chicago. So I would like to expand that. I mean, I don't want it to solely focus on local artists, but I want it to have a strong local presence. But expand it to include national and, if possible, international artists. I mean, I have an architecture exhibition I want to bring in from New York, which which includes early 20th century modern architects, from all around the world. So not only is that not particularly contemporary, but it also is more global. But it addresses contemporary concerns and what we can learn from modern architecture.
When I had a gallery, I noticed that if I did a show with a known artist from out of town, I would get, some people to come to the opening. If I would do a group show with, let's say, 8 artists from Chicago, I would have a much larger group of people at the audience. But that didn't necessarily correspond to sales. It might be many more sales with a smaller opening of a more significant figure from out of town. But for a museum, it seems to me a lot of what you want to do is grow audience. Sales is probably not even on your mind at all. And so that if there are more local artists and bigger group shows, there's more word of mouth and there's more audience, and then maybe there's more audience development. Do you try and have those kinds of things happen periodically, or not?
I mean, because I've only been there a year, I've just sort of been analyzing each, I feel like every exhibition is kind of an experiment to see what works and what doesn't work, and, who comes and who doesn't come, how the different elements of the exhibition and details affect the audience and the attendance. One of the things that, in addition to, there are a couple initiatives that I wanted to, set forth, when I first got to the museum. And one of them was this idea of creating a cohesion among the different parts of the museum. So that was one of them. Another one was to, have something, I mean, this is something our director and I talk about, is to have something happening and something, dynamic happening at the museum. So it seems like there's something going on there, that it's not just a static place. And when you see it from the outside, I mean, you don't know what's happening on the inside. And that could involve something happening on the exterior, so that it seems lively, but also a project that engages the public directly, whether it's an artist on site who's doing an interactive kind of performance, or an interactive piece that requires public collaboration or public participation. Or I commissioned an artist in the home exhibition, Alberto Aguilar, to create 12 different sculptures in collaboration with 12 families around, around the local area. And so they were intimately involved in the creation of these works because he made these monuments using their personal belongings. So those created these incredibly direct connections between families and the community and the exhibition. And they all came. In fact, we had a huge, attendance at the opening. And so if the 12 families involved in this created of this one artist's work, they're thrilled that they have, their basketball is in the museum, and they will bring, their cousins and their friends and their, to come see it. And that's not why I did it, but the idea of these kind of socially interactive works is something that I think can go a long way, both because they're interesting projects, as long as they're interesting projects. They're interesting projects, but they can cover a number of bases. They can make these relationships and cultivate relationships with different audiences that will, that will continue to support the museum.
Cool. How do you feel about a collection?
Well, we have a collection.
I know. How do you feel about that? Do you have to honor it and show it and grow it, or is it sort of an annoyance, or what?
Well, that is exactly what I'm working on right now.
Okay.
When I got there, no one seemed to be interested, particularly in the collection, and there was talk of getting rid of it. I think that's partially because no one had any idea what we had in our collection, both in-house and beyond. And so I decided that, well, this is the only way to resolve this is to do an exhibition of the collection. And in fact, I'm doing an inventory of the collection, both, in the galleries and behind the scenes. So one of the goals of this inventory is to create this exhibition in the museum where the you know, as much of the collection as I can get out will be out floor to ceiling in every space. But then that will also introduce our collection to the public, introduce our collection to the people who are working at the museum and are on our board, and also determine then what the future direction of the collection will be.
Sweet, I look forward to seeing that. Christine, you get the last question. Take it up.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say hi. Elmhurst Art Museum is a little gem out there, and I am one of the artists that you chose to be part of the group exhibit at Water Street Studio. So I just wanted to say hi because I didn't get to see you on Friday.
Sorry,
Yeah.
That's a good way to end it. Thank you all. Hey, Staci, I think this has been really great. I think you've provided us with a ton of information. I appreciate, you know, the integrity that you bring to your work and the integrity you bring to this discussion. You've been awesome. Staci, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
All right, everybody, I've unmuted you all. Staci, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.